Hello chess friends and welcome to the Art of Chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit decline series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from White's and from Black's perspective, and today we're continuing with our Queen's Gambit decline series and the so-called Tarrasch defense. The Tarrasch defense we have explained so far with some classical and most common systems that can happen to you from White's and from Black's perspective. In that videos we have explained the most important strategical elements of these openings, but today we're analyzing really a sharper line of the Tarrasch defense. Today we're analyzing the so-called Marshall Gambit, and the Marshall Gambit is sort of a gambit that you should try to avoid if you're playing the game as white. But if that happens, I think if you're playing the game as black, you should be really familiar with the outcomes of these openings, because I think if you may be a lower rated player and you want to play the Tarrasch defense, then I think you should be familiar with this Marshall Gambit, because a much higher rated opponent will test you out for sure in one particular moment of your career in the Marshall Gambit. So that's why I think it's very important to know this tricky opening. So let's check out now what is the Tarrasch defense again, and then what is of course the Marshall Gambit. So here after move d4, Black's response is the move d5, c4, and we have now the Queen's Gambit decline, which is the move e6, knight to c3, and now comes the Tarrasch defense move c5. And in this video we're not analyzing different ideas. Today we're analyzing really only the Marshall Gambit, because in our previous videos we have explained the most common and most popular ideas for both sides. So that's why if you want to get a better understanding what's going on the board in this particular position, please check out my series before. In that videos we explained the Tarrasch defense more. Today we're analyzing only the Marshall Gambit, which is now this continuation. After move c takes d5, we have now e takes d5 as the normal response, and now comes the Marshall Gambit move, which is the move e4. And here already we have really wild dynamics in the center of the board. From Black's perspective, I recommend you here to simply take out the pawn, but the e pawn. I'm not recommending you to take the d pawn, because then queen to d4 happens, and then you are a little bit pressured here in the center of the board. So you see, even if you take, then the queens are off the board, then the queens are traded, and then knight to e4 happens, and you could lose really the game tactically, because your king is stuck in the center. So that's why after move e4, the best way here is to play d takes e4. And there are now basically, let me call it 3-4 choices here for white. White can play, of course, knight takes e4. White can also play here the move bishop to c4, bishop to b5, or here the progress with the move d5. These are the lines that we're analyzing today. Here, if you take, of course, knight takes e4, then c takes d4 happens, and I think that white has now problems to take out the pawn, because there is always one problem in normal development. That's the main issue. After potential knight to f3, still we can play knight to c6, and the problem is now that the bishop cannot come into the game. You would love, of course, to pin this knight that is the key protector of the d4 square, but here then queen to a5 happens, and here you lose the piece. So that's the main issue here. So that's why this idea to take out the pawn on e4 immediately is really not the best of ways. That's why it's called the gambit. You don't want to take the pawn immediately. You play always the gambit line in order to create at least some kind of a piece activity, and at least you create some kind of attack. So that's why we're analyzing first this move bishop to c4. And one of the most popular grandmasters that is playing the Marshall Gambit many times is actually the top grandmaster Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So we're analyzing now first two games by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, in which he played against much lower rated players. As I said in the beginning of the video, you could really face this Marshall Gambit if you're a lower rated player and you're playing a much stronger opponent. Then I think he will test you, as I said, with the Marshall Gambit. Here we have two cases. In one case, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov won the game with the white pieces, but also lost one game against a much lower rated opponent. So that's why it's very important, as I said, to know this particular outcomes and the particular continuations in this particular line. So here after move bishop to c4, my recommendation is simply to take c takes d4, and again here white should probably simply take knight takes e4. At least it is some kind of a compensation. You have at least two pieces out. At least these two pieces are centralized. These are active pieces for this centralized pawn that black has. But the problem is, again, this normal continuation. Again, with the move knight to f6, we're challenging again white's knight. The problem is, again, this pinning idea is not working. That's actually the bad part for white here. White can really never pin some knight here. That's the main issue, because then queen to a5 is happening again. We get out of the pin and simply take out the knight. That's really brutal stuff already. So that's why after move c takes d4, as I said, after knight to e4, knight to f6, and here probably queen to d3 or bishop to d3 would be normal ideas. Knight to f6 or something, queen to f6. So again, in this particular outcome, I think that white didn't gain anything for sacrificing the pawn. When we sacrifice the pawn in some other gambit lines, I think white is gaining much more. So that's why Shakhriyar Mamedyarov after move c takes d4 spiced it up with the move queen to b3, and this is now a really sick, brutal stuff. The problem is now after potential d takes c3, you get this one, bishop to f7, of course you get out, and then you lose also the knight, and in this particular scenario black is simply tactically lost. Queen to f7 is going to happen. This bishop is coming into the game, maybe even the rook if necessary. So with the king in the center position, black is simply losing the game. And here after move queen to b3, now comes the actual critical moment of the game. So as we said, here it's not the time to take d takes c3, huge mistake, and every particular move is mistake. There is only one good move, and that's actually the tricky part of the Marshall Gambit. That's why I think it's very important to know this opening, because if you play knight to c6, I don't know, bishop to e6, queen to d7, queen to c7, queen to e7, every of this particular moves is simply bad. Because if you play, let's see, queen to e7, then knight to d5 is coming, and again you're facing many tactical problems. If you play the same, queen to d7, queen to c7, again these are not good moves. The only good move, we're analyzing this move in our second game that I'll show you today, is actually really a weird move, knight to f6. Actually you're giving up your f7 pawn, but the most important thing is that the knight is not on g8 anymore, where after potential bishop to f7 it can be again taken here by the bishop. So that's why you see now, first of all, this game which Shakhriyar Mamedyarov won, because black played here simply a bad move. After move bishop queen to b3 here, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov's opponent was player Gennadij Ginsburg. He was around 2500. For instance, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov in this particular game was 2757 rated, so 250 rating points he had more than his opponent. So here queen to d7 is actually not the best of moves, because here now after move knight to e4, we can notice now that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov has now 3 pieces already out. The knight is very active, the queen is standing in the way of the bishop, the knight is not coming so easily out into the game. Knight is f3 is happening, bishop to g5. So the activity now finally that white is gaining here is much better. So that's now the cool story of this gambit, because that's exactly how you want to play gambit. You give up a pawn, but then you're storming with your pieces towards your opponent's king. But as I said, here after move queen to d7, the correct move, which is really wild, is pardon me, if after move queen to b3 is actually the move knight to f6. This is the only way to get out of this tactical mess, allowing your opponent to take here on f7, but at least you're staying with these 2 centralized pawns. But okay, here after move queen to d7, knight takes e4, we have knight to c6, we have bishop to d2 here by Mamedyarov, we have a5, a4, and here after move bishop to b4, it was already almost game over, because here it was this stunner, bishop to b4 after a takes b4. Now Shakhriyar Mamedyarov found really beautiful tactic, because if you take here with the queen, then you get knight to d6, the fork. So this was a beautiful tactic here around f7. So it forced now the king to come on f8, and now after move bishop to g8, rook to g8, knight to e2, we have queen to e6, and now after move queen to d3, we see now that again black faces many problems. First of all, this d4 is weak, this knight is very active. We can also play kingside castling, even f4, f5 is opportunity, even this rook can come into the game again. The activity again that white is gaining here is much better for white. So that's why here black tried to move b6 in order to somehow maybe develop the light square bishop, but the Shakhriyar Mamedyarov is a great tactician. He found this stunner. First of all, rook to c1, we have bishop to a6, but not the problem, because first of all the check, we have king to e8, and now beautiful tactic here. We have some x-ray attacks here on this diagonal, because after rook to c6 we have queen to c6, and now knight to f6. Everything is pretty much forced. You have to take out with the queen if you don't want to lose the queen on c6. So queen to f6, we have queen to a8, we have king to f7, and now Shakhriyar Mamedyarov grabbed the piece, and this was simply game over with this extra piece. It's of course much better position here for white. But let's go back to this critical moment. As we said, after move queen to b3, here if you play the move knight to f6, and here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov's opponent was Vladimir Gemba, so again the rating difference was even higher. Here in this particular case the rating difference was more than 300 rating points. So Shakhriyar Mamedyarov again tried to trick here his opponent with the Marshall Gambit, but here black played the correct move knight to f6. Here in continuation after bishop to f7, we see now that after move king to e7, first of all the e4 pawn is protected. Okay, we lost the pawn on f7, but now we have a great shield. We have these two pawns that are protecting us from some attacks on the e file. On the d file the queen is protected, and now suddenly it seems so that white doesn't have such a great play. If you play, for instance, knight to d5, okay, we're simply taking out knight takes d5 and we're simplifying the game, I think. So that's why it's not such a huge problem here. Here for black to defend this position. In the continuation here, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov tried knight to b5, but now knight to c6, normal development. You see these two knights are protecting these two pawns, again great shield. And now in the continuation of the game, the only thing I think we have to do is simply chase away the little bit the bishop here, because the bishop is really annoying here on f7. We don't want to tolerate it. But here after move bishop to d2 we have a6, and here after move knight to a3, here a5 was played, and from this point on black had a comfortable game. After rook to c1, now comes this idea, knight to e5, and I don't really want to show you now the whole game. That's not the point of the video, because in many occasions your opponent can play different ideas. Then I really don't want you to study these openings by heart, but I really think that you should be familiar with this idea to play king to e7, shield yourself with these two centralized pawns, and still you're up a pawn, still you have a great control. You have to chase away this bishop and somehow maybe get with this bishop into the game, but I don't see here really great ways for white to attack you. So let's check out now different idea, which could be in my opinion even one of the best ways if you want to play the Marshall Gambit. Here it was a game again by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov against Vladislav Artemiev. Vladislav Artemiev was European chess champion, and this game was played in 2021 in the Meltwater Cup. And here you see how tricky again this opening can be, but with a different move order, because again we have the Tarrasch of the move c5, here after c takes d5, e takes d5, and now e4, again challenging the center. Here Artemiev also took d takes e4, and now bishop to b5. This is in my opinion much better than this idea to play bishop to c4, because with the move bishop to b5 you're forcing now black to put something in front of the king, and when that happens, then if you play knight to d7, bishop to d7, then there is no problem anymore with the potential trades of queens on the d file. That's a huge difference, because white is not risking this trades of queens. So here in the continuation we have bishop to d7, and now knight from g to e2, we have bishop to b5, here knight to b5, and here after a6 we have here knight to c3, we have c takes d4, but now knight to d4, and okay, again white has lost the pawn, but at least these two knights are out. Still black is lacking in development, and I think so far it's a decent compensation, maybe not the best of compensations for the pawn, but it's playable now for both sides. The engine gives here slightly edge for white, so as I said, it's maybe playable also for white. But in the continuation, knight to f6 was played by Artemiev, and you see now how even the top grandmasters are blundering, because after bishop to g5, which is now the normal idea, now this idea queen to a5 is not working, because knight to c3 is perfectly fine, is covering the king. Now Artemiev makes actually a huge mistake with the move h6. h6 is not the best of moves, because what Mamedyarov should have played, and he didn't unfortunately for him, he should have played simply bishop to f6, and then after queen to f6 simply kingside castling, and there's not a good way here to defend the pawn anymore. We'll take the pawn, and then these two centralized knights here with the support of rook again could cause many problems here for black. So that's why here in the continuation, after move bishop to g5, actually the best way is here to play knight from b to d7. Protect yourself, because again this knight to e4 pin is not working, because again you get this move queen to a5. This move queen to a5 you should be really familiar with, because this is sort of a tactic that happens many times. You see, if white gets greedy, and if white, for instance, tries to defend his pawn, try to get his pawn back. So that's why here it's not working anymore. Here, after move knight from b to d7, the possible continuation would be probably something like castling. That would be now a playable position again for both sides. Then after move queen to a5, bishop to f6, and after knight to f6, here knight takes e4 could be a possibility, because if you take, of course, then you get pinned here by rook to e1, or you could face this brutal tactic with the move queen to g4. And from this point on, I really use the engine because it's such a sick, brutal continuation. I'm not even sure if this is playable for white and for black, because after move queen to g4, this is now really brutal line. You have to play f5, and now after move knight to f5, we have knight to f6, kicking away the queen. But now after move rook to e1, you see you have to cover. After queen to c4, queen to d5, this is everything forced here. And as I said, this is really perfect top engine line, which I think even Shakhriyar, Mamedyarov and Vladislav Artemiev weren't familiar with, but this was really a possible brutal continuation. And from now queen to c7, you have to cover yourself. Now knight to e7, here we have bishop to e7, and now after rook to e7, there is not even a good way to protect anymore your g7 pawn. So that's why even rook to e8 is here the best continuation. And now after rook to g7, king to f8, but this is really you can be the judge of this particular position. The engine gives you again equal chances for both sides, again slightly edge for black, but you can be the judge of this position. I would not love to play here the position from black's perspective, but that, as I said, was our analysis. For instance, after move knight to d7, then as we said, castling, and then after potential queen to a5, you can face this really brutal tactic with the move knight to e4. So it's, as I said, also something that you should be really familiar with. So but okay, here in the continuation, after move bishop to g5, you see Artemiev played h6, a huge mistake. Bishop to f6 should have been the best move here for Mamedyarov. After move h6, Mamedyarov played bishop to h4, tried to stay with the bishop on the board, but now with bishop to e7 and knight to f5, we have castling, queen to b3, knight from b to d7, and here in this particular position, finally Vladislav Artemiev regrouped. If you take queen takes b7, then you get, of course, rook to b8, and you lose also the b2 pawn. From this point on, it was sort of a game. It was a tough battle, but Vladislav Artemiev won the game. This game will be also in the description below. All of the games that we are analyzing today will be in the description below. So if you want to study some also different ideas for yourself, some different lines, you can check them out and try to see maybe some different and even better continuations. So as I said, there is this way to regroup. I think this was the possible continuation after move e4, as we said, d takes e4, and now bishop to b5, bishop to d7, and now this idea knight from g to e2, and then try to take out with the knight. So this bishop to b5 is sort of an idea to slow down a little bit black's progress in black's development in the continuation. So let's check out now one different idea that can happen. Here it's a game played by David Bronstein against Slavoj Marjanovic with a different idea. Here after e6 and here e4, we have d takes e4, now again d5. If you want to try to maybe avoid all of this mess, I think there is maybe a great way how to escape from any of white ideas with the move f5. This is maybe a slightly riskier choice because you're weakening a little bit your light square diagonal, but here Slavoj Marjanovic played, I think, really a beautiful game against a favorite. I think David Bronstein was really a great tactician, and he could really surprise you in many elements. So with the move f5, actually maybe you can, maybe it's you that will surprise your opponent here, because here with the move bishop to f4, which is sort of a must move, you have to bring your pieces in the game. Here Slavoj Marjanovic simply competed on dark squares. We have bishop to b5, again this idea, but now with king to f7, actually black is perfectly fine, because it seems so again that is a weird square for the king, but the problem is now there is not a support here. The queen can maybe create one check, but then with g6 everything is perfectly fine. With knight to f6 and rook to f8, or if possible, so far not possible, but if you get maybe your rook to e8, then black is again a comfortable game. The only thing that white is here is this very annoying pawn on the d file, but there is a very important thing in this particular line that you have to recognize, I think, and it's an isolated pawn. So an isolated pawn is a strategical element that you have to recognize in middle game stage. If that happens, we know the rules of the isolated pawn. We should have simply a blockade. So that's why Slavoj Marjanovic, I think, realized, okay, there are maybe some tactical traps, there are maybe some wild ideas here for white, but actually we should treat this middle game stage as isolated pawn situation. So that's why I think this is not something that white want to gain. So as I say, if you want to get out of this all of this mess that maybe Shakhriyar Mamedyarov and Vladislav Artemiev played, maybe this f5 line is perfectly fine. Here from king to f7, you see white is desperately trying to search for ways how to attack the king. We have knight to f6 anyway, and here after move bishop to c4. Maybe the main idea here is to create some kind of a discovered attack, but still with no worries here for black, because here after move a6 we can here from black's perspective use this pawn majority, this 3 versus 2 situation, and simply push away this minor pieces of white. So here a4 played by here David Bronstein. We have a6 h6 kicking away, preventing also the knight here to jump on this very important g5 square. We have now f3. Here Bronstein is trying desperately to open some files and diagonals in front of the king, but here after e takes f3, we have queen to f3, rook to e8 attacking the king. After move bishop to e2, now you see finally we have sort of a castling by hand, and now with king to g8 black can secure the king and has, I think, a decent game. So here in the continuation we have b6, we have castling, rook to a7, beautiful move also by Slavoj Marjanovic. He's screening now a potential rook battery on the e file. We have now here queen to g3. Finally this bishop is challenged. Here in the continuation we have bishop to f4, queen to f4, and now knight to d7. We have bishop to d3, and now very important move, knight to e5. And okay, here we have to agree, David Bronstein played, I think, really a beautiful attack, and he takes the pawn. But after bishop to f5, queen to f5, as I said, this is now a simple isolated pawn position. Now, if we watch now the position harder, I think again white didn't gain so much because this is a weak d pawn. So here in the continuation we have king to g8, first securing the king. Normal idea here by black. We have knight to f4, and now rook to f7, creating also some discovered threats against the queen. Here queen to h3, we have queen to d6, again the blockade against an isolated pawn. So again I'm pointing out, if this position gets an endgame stage, well, black is winning the game for sure because of the weak d pawn. So although, as I'm going again, I want to repeat myself a little bit, I think David Bronstein played here really a brilliant attacking game, and he didn't allow here black to breathe, but the outcome is simplifying the position here for black, and here black has a decent game. So here in the continuation, rook from a to e1, we have c4, we have queen to g3, rook to e7, this beautiful rook battery on the e file. We have knight to e4, knight takes e4, rook to e4, and now after move queen to c5, the king has to move. Now here Slavoj Marjanovic changed the direction of the attack. He realized that there are many here problems on the f file, that the knight is a little bit overloaded to the defense of the d5 columns. Here we have h3, we have now the spin, knight to d3, really beautiful move here. After queen to f3, rook to f7, and from this point on the game is over. There's simply too much pressure on the f file. Here in the continuation, queen to g4, queen to d6, we have g3, and now This is a beautiful move, a beautiful queen sacrifice. If you take, of course, then you get checkmated by here this move, and then rook to f2 is also beautiful checkmate. So that's why here queen to e6 was played, but now after move queen to e6 we have rook to e6, but now here after move g5 the knight has to move and you lose the rook for sure. So in this position David Bronstein resigned. So as I said, this is something I think worth to study. There are plenty of lines that you probably face, and you have to, I think, understand sometimes even the game, if the game starts tactical in a tactical way, still you have to recognize some normal patterns like the isolated pawn, backward pawn, and simply stuck on this weakness. Then you can have a comfortable game, because here in this game Mamedyarov played maybe not the best of moves, but a simplification idea worked here perfectly fine. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed our study of the Marshall Gambit. Still there are plenty of lines that you probably will face if you choose to play the Tarrasch defense. If you want to study the Tarrasch defense more, here's the link of our whole playlist with some different lines, with some different variations that we have analyzed so far. And if you want to study our whole Queen's Gambit decline series, here's also the link of our Queen's Gambit decline with some ideas like the Harvitz attack and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.